Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host of this session of Cut the Crop. And today my guest is FAR Senior Field Researcher Charles Merfield. Welcome.
Thank you,
Of course,
Alison.
we all know you as Merf.
Indeed.
So I'll just call you Merf. And today we're going to be talking about mechanical weeding. But probably before we start with that, let's just talk about what the drivers are to look for alternatives to the more commonly used sort of chemical herbicides.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Well, the primary driver is herbicide resistance, full stop. As the work that FAR and the MB project have done over the recent years, herbicide resistance is now clearly a major issue. But we also have, sitting underneath that, the issue that we are seeing very little new herbicide chemistry. There's been no full mode of action since the 1980s, the ALS herbicides. So while we're losing the ability of existing herbicides, they're not being replaced. And also we have the whole consumer and legislative issues of consumers don't like this. So that's kind of sitting underneath all of that.
Yeah. And it's a very similar situation for insecticide and fungicide resistance. But I guess they're a little bit better off because there's actually quite a lot of biological fungicides and insecticides coming on the market from the big guys. There aren't many bioherbicides. That's actually a very challenging space.
Yes, it is indeed. I mean, the nice thing with the biofungicides and the biopesticides is they are very, very specific, which is great because then you can take out an aphid, for example, and leave your beneficial insects unharmed. The problem with weeds is they're quite a different pest. They're on the same trophic level. So they're competitors. So any one crop will have many dozens, even hundreds of weeds. And if you have something like a bioherbicide that's really specific, that means you need hundreds of herbicides. Yeah. It doesn't really work.
Yeah.
So there are a small number of bioherbicides that have been commercialized. But that whole field, I think, is something of a dead end unless you've got a very problematic weed in a very high value crop.
Yeah. And so it does mean that the whole mechanical weeding sort of area has come back into fashion because people tend to think of that as being like the old style of farming. But the reality is that what's coming out in the mechanical weeding space is actually quite innovative.
Absolutely. I mean, before we had the herbicides going back to the 1940s, the majority of weed control was through cultural, such as rotations, and mechanical weeding approaches. And the herbicides they were so effective and reliable and stuff. Their uptake was so quick that the mechanical weeding almost got forgotten about, with the exception of organics, which decided to prohibit synthetic herbicides, and it kind of kept that mechanical stuff going, but it has developed it. So now when you look at the mechanical weeding machinery we have now, compared to the stuff in the pre-herbicide era, it's a Model T Ford versus Tesla. You know, the difference is hard to really grasp. You know, we have artificial intelligent robots. You know, we have computer-guided hose that can work at speeds of 20 kilometers an hour and working widths of 20, 25 meters. So these things have comparable work rates and usability to spraying.
Yeah. And then we're going to talk specifically about sort of tine weeding because that's probably the most relevant to arable growers. But before we do that, can you just give us a little bit of a high-level sort of outline of the range of different types of mechanical weeders?
So I break these down into what I call two broad categories: contiguous, which we typically call broadacre. So they weed the whole field surface, including the crop. And then we have incontiguous weeders, which we used to call inter-row hose, and they have a gap for the crop row, and they traditionally just weeded between the crop rows, the inter-row area. But now we have a whole range of different tools for weeding the intra-row, the crop row itself as well. So these machines can now do two weeding jobs almost at once. And within each of those categories now, the range of machines is ever expanding. This is kind of the good news compared to the herbicides, where the herbicide toolbox is starting to sound a little bit empty. the mechanical weeding toolbox keeps filling up and up and up. People have new innovations, new ways of approaching stuff, and so we get more and more options in this space.
Yeah. So let's talk specifically about arable farmers. If they want to start down, the whole mechanical weeding space, what are the best options for them, and what is the work that FAR's been doing?
So the very best option, the easiest place to start if you're an arable farmer, is a spring tine weeder. So you can liken these to an enormous garden rake. So literally, it doesn't sound very technical or flash, but I mean, it's a lot of the time the simplest ideas in this space, are the ones that give you that effectiveness and reliability. And so they are literally a series of about 5 mil wide spring steel tines that are very lightly pulled through the soil surface, and they uproot and break and bury little weed seedlings. And arable crops are typically larger seeded, so they're planted deeper. They've got a more robust foliage so they can survive that weeding technique. And the great thing with springtime weeders for an arable producer is they need to make no changes to their farm system. They can literally be used as a drop-in replacement for a herbicide. It's like a herbicide that covers the whole field surface with herbicide. The springtime weeders do exactly the same.
Apart from the fact that they have to buy the equipment.
Yeah, this is one of the challenges, and this is kind of one of the almost miracles, if you like, of chemical pest management as a whole. One machine, the sprayer, can do all your weed, your fungi, and your insect management. Whereas with mechanical weeding, yes, you're going to have to get out the checkbook. You are going to have to buy these machines. But again, we are now reaching the stage, I think, where people are really kind of going, okay, I'm not controlling my weeds with chemicals. I now have to seriously look at these mechanical options.
So let's talk about the work that FAR has been doing.
So FAR started some trials looking at springtime weeding as that kind of drop-in replacement for herbicides in arable crops. And we've started off with spring barley, giving ourselves one of the slightly easier starting points rather than going for the kind of really challenging crops to start with. There's a bit of a learning experience here for FAR as well. And so we're looking at those and going, okay, what point in that crop production cycle, and principally this is all around establishment, could we use a springtime weeder and also use herbicides? So what we're starting to do is think about, okay, what type of herbicides are we using? There's pre-emergence herbicides, post-emergent herbicides. Which of those could we substitute a tine weeder for? And it's been really interesting for me actually getting into some of the details, because some of the pre-emergence herbicides form a cap on the soil, which has to remain unbroken. So if you go through with a mechanical weeder, you've destroyed your herbicide cap. And it's kind of like, well, that's not a very good idea. There's other pre-plant, pre-emergence herbicides that require some incorporation, and probably a springtime weeder is one of the best machines for actually incorporating that herbicide into the top 2 to 3 centimeters to ensure its efficacy.
But presumably, the tine weeder is only going to work on small weeds.
Absolutely.
Once you've got big established weeds, you're not going to be able to use that.
So absolutely, and typically the herbicides as well. A lot of these are most effective when weeds are between cotyledon and say 6 true leaves. A springtime weeder, these contiguous weeders, they tend to work best on the really small weeds, cotyledon, 2 true leaves. If you're then kind of looking at, okay, I need to be able to manage larger weeds in my crop in potentially a later stage, then we start looking at the incontiguous weeders, things like inter-row hose with camera guidance systems. So you can use these things on the back of a tractor on the 3-point linkage as you would like any other farm implement. But these are a lot more aggressive and they will kill bigger weeds. But these require significant understanding and potentially changes to your drill spacings or matching your drill and the hoe. Okay. So there's a lot more complexity once you start kind of moving from those broadacre contiguous weeders into the incontiguous weeders like an inter-row hoe.
Yeah. So have we got like a program of work?
So absolutely. Yeah. So we're starting to develop. We're working with the machinery importers. So this is a key thing in this space. FAR works with the agrochemical companies to understand their offerings. So we're working with machinery companies and importers to understand what machines we have on the ground here, and then starting to expand our weeding. So we've been discussing maize. For me, maize is the perfect crop for inter-row hoeing. It's nice wide rows, lots of ground for aggressive weeding tools, move at speed through crops, big robust plants. Down here, we'll be looking at almost certainly a winter sown crop next. They're more challenging because they're growing into the ground when the ground's cooling down, so their growth is slower. Pre-emergent herbicides are a lot more important in your autumn sown crops than your spring sown crops, so we're kind of working what steps we take next.
Yeah. So obviously, organic growers have used this and continue to use this. Have we got any good lessons to learn from what they've been doing?
Absolutely. I mean, I look at this, I kind of look at this now, having come out of organic, so being slightly biased, but I kind of go, if we hadn't had organic agriculture in this space, there would literally be nothing now.
Yeah.
We would literally be going back to the steel from the pre-herbicide era in the back of the shed that the grandparents used. So there has been a huge amount of learning. You know, there are very large areas of organic farms globally. You know, through Europe, there's organic arable farms that are very, very comparable to here in New Zealand in terms of their soils and their climate, and they have exceptional levels of weed control.
Well, I was going to ask what the performance is like because, growers, we are used to, sort of spraying on a herbicide, getting complete knockdown. I mean, are you getting the same kind of weed control from mechanical weeding?
You can get that level of weed control, but you have to know what you're doing. This is one of the things with the herbicides, with chemical agriculture. It's simplified stuff. Yeah. You know, it made farming less complicated. And as we're kind of stepping back from that, the reverse lesson is you need to understand your farm ecosystem. You need to understand your weeds and your crops and their ecology and their interactions better. So if you just start out in mechanical weeding and think, we're just going to use a tine weeder in place of a herbicide, and that's your level of knowledge, you are probably asking for failure. If you understand the details and understand what the right timings and how best to integrate them, the chances of having high levels of success are really good. And also to me, in terms of things like weather windows, they're highly complementary. You know, if it's too windy or it's not windy enough or it's really, really hot, you can't spray often you can't spray chemicals. You know, there's volatilization and other issues. If it's really hot and windy, that's the perfect time to go weeding with a mechanical weeder because the weeds will desiccate when you've weeded them. So to me, actually, by having both, it's kind of almost the best of both worlds. You know, organic growers have decided not to use herbicides at all. And there's a fair few times I've stood in the middle of an organic paddock and gone, man, if we could just put one herbicide over this, we would save ourselves so much trouble.
Yeah.
And so for me, for a conventional grower moving into mechanical weeding, that's actually opening up their opportunities. You know, the example we had in South Canterbury, it was really dry, perfect conditions for springtime weeding.
So it's all, it's us, promoting that whole integrated weed management, using the right tool, technology or product for the right situation.
Absolutely. Integrated weed management. The international weed science community doesn't have a plan B. Their plan is integrated weed management. So we have to make it work. And mechanical weed management, as the herbicides are running into issues, the mechanical weed management is becoming a really important part of that toolkit.
So how are we supporting growers who want to explore trying out mechanical weeding? Because I think we've had a couple of tryouts with some of our growers.
Indeed. So, I went down a couple of weeks ago now. I went down and took a springtime weeder down to Hugh and Robbie Wigley, south of Timaru. It's been a very, very dry autumn, at least until the last week when we finally had some rain. So they were kind of going, okay, what are my options? And so they had read the Arable Extra, where I talked about these weeders.
Yeah, I should mention that Arable Extra, issue number 134.
Issue number 134 is the one you need to go and read right now. So Robbie and Hugh, they said, right, okay, let's see what the potential is here. So I took a weeder down to them.
Where did the weeder come from?
So the weeder's from a local organic grower, Streamside Organics.
And they lent it to
they
us.
Very, very kindly, very generously just lent us. It's a small machine. It's not a kind of large arable machine, so it's perfect for the kind of intensive veg they're doing. Unfortunately, then fits on a trailer that I can take down on the back of a ute. And so we took this down to the Wigleys, and we tried it in 3 different paddocks, gave it a good couple of 50-meter runs in each paddock. And essentially, I'm going to get in touch with them in the next couple of days and say, well, we've had some rain now. How's that all looking down there? But certainly on the day, we went through some paddocks, quite small wheat in it, to slightly larger wheat, also paddocks with residue, that had a oilseed rape crop through there before. So there's, quite large sticks, 1/2 foot long, 6 inches. And that went through the tine weeder perfectly.
And I think you took some videos because I do recall seeing them on social media.
Yeah. So we got some videos and photos, kind of before and after photos of the weeding. And the key thing now will be to go down and really have a look and see how that's performing again.
Yeah. So are there any constraints or challenges for growers to be able to adopt this? What would be the main reason a grower would say, oh, it's too difficult, or I can't do it on my farm?
If the chemicals are still working for you, the chemicals are the easy option. But if you don't look after your chemicals are not going to look after you, So to me, a key message here is these mechanical weeders are an option to reduce your herbicide use. The kind of irony here is the more you use your herbicides, the more likely they are going to fail you.
Yes.
So if you cannot use a herbicide, even if it's just one in one season, by replacing it with a mechanical weeder, that is going to help protect that herbicide and keep it working longer on your farm. So to me, the really smart thing to do here is not to say, can I not use these things? Is to say, how do I use them? And so when you are in that weather window where it's perfect for tine weeding and the weeds are small and you can do a really good job, you say, we will use the tine weeder, because then another time when the weather and conditions are not so conducive for mechanical weeding, you can say, I'm very glad we still have these herbicides and I'm very glad they're still working.
Yeah. So, it's the whole issue of integrated weed pest disease management is you look for alternatives to protect the chemicals so that they will continue to work.
Yeah. To me, the simple description here is diversification, rotational diversification, but diversifying your weed management options. So you have those options, so if you say it is a dry autumn, we will just do mechanical weeding and save our herbicides for another year.
So with respect to, we've got the mechanical weeding, and that's obviously the obvious first cab off the rank for growers to explore. But there are lots of other innovative things going on in the weed management space. Just give us a little bit of an idea of some of the other technologies out there.
Yeah, to me, it's quite astonishing, having been involved in weed management as a whole for 30 odd years now. The level of or the number of real major innovations is almost zero. We've seen no new herbicide modes of actions. There's been, kind of tweaking and within group improvements, but no kind of major breakthroughs. But what we've seen in about the last 5 to 10 years is the advanced AI-based robotic weeders and also electrical weeding coming through. So these advanced robotic weeders, they're identifying individual weeds, both crop and plants, even in high density crops such as carrots, and then identifying which is the crop plant, which is the weed, and then individually killing the weeds through things as Star Warsy as lasers, but also as prosaic as just having a metal probe that literally just pushes the weed into the ground.
Yeah.
Which I kind of goes, it's really basic, but it's actually probably really reliable and simple and cheap. So it's the AIs that are really driving that. And also electrical weeding. So this is an ancient technology. It was first patented at the end of the 1800s. There was a burst of research in the 1970s and 80s, particularly in the UK and in the States, but it essentially lost out to glyphosate. Glyphosate came along in 1974 and it was miraculous, and widely adopted. But what's happened now is glyphosate is having challenges across the globe. And so electrical weeding is seeing its niche. And to me, the profound thing about the electrical weeding is it can be a direct glyphosate replacement, because the electricity gets into the top of the root system. It will typically kill most plants unless they have tricky underground organs they can regenerate from. So it's potentially there to replace a whole suite of herbicides. Even with the robotic weeders, we can equip with them, instead of a laser, we could equip them with an electrical probe that therefore kills individual plants. So not just smaller plants, but actually quite larger established plants. So if we start saying, okay, we have a herbicide resistance problem in this paddock as an arable farmer, you're kind of going, sending a robot in to weed everything is probably not going to cut it. there's a lot of weeds. It's going to take forever. It's going to cost a fortune. But once we've been through with herbicides, maybe mechanical weeders, and we're still going, there's some weeds surviving here. It's almost then you kind of send in the cavalry, send in the robots to be able to go and scout, identify those problems, and then use a different non-chemical weed control technique to kill those herbicide or those mechanical, those plants that have survived mechanical weeding.
Yeah.
So more tools again.
Exactly. But it comes back to your comment earlier that the growers have to have more understanding of what the tools are and how you use them and when you use them in the most effective way.
Absolutely.
So obviously, I mean, the whole area of weed management is a big, important topic for our growers. So what's FAR doing in that whole space?
So there's a wide research program. So we're doing everything from looking at traditional herbicide screening trials, specific crops and specific weed combinations. For example, broom rape in white clover is a growing concern. It prohibits, we're not allowed to export to certain markets if that's a seed contaminant. And so a wide range of different programs looking at all aspects of weed management, from kind of the mostly mechanical stuff or integrating mechanical into herbicide programs, all the way through to specific herbicide issues.
Yeah. So just coming back to the tine weeding, just a reminder to listeners, if you want to know more about mechanical weeding, then our Arable Extra, issue 134. If a grower specifically wants to know more about tine weeding and perhaps wants to give it a bit of a try, what should they be contacting you?
Yep, give me a call. Very happy to talk, and very happy to talk about helping them understand weed management as a whole topic. I've been talking to a number of farmers, and it's been quite clear to me that some of that fundamental weed ecology, weed bank management and things like that, there's a lot of myths and myth understandings out there. So at an individual grower level, I'd be very happy to work through them and say, okay, what are you doing? What are your problems? What is the right way to kind of start looking at how we improve your weed management system as a whole? And it's that integrated approach.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Merf.
Thank you very much, Alison.
Yes, and thank you very much, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.